Hello, my name is Hello, my name is Brenda Price. I'm the Associate State Director for AARP, Michigan. Thank you for being with us today. We have a wonderful presentation today on taking charge of your interview. Before we get started, I'd like to do a housekeeping tip. You are on Facebook, so you have a comment section. In the comment section, we would like you to put any questions that you have throughout the presentation in the comment section. And then at the end of the program, I will announce your questions and Dr. McDougall will answer them. So that's the tip. Put your questions in the comment section. Getting started. Again, our topic is taking charge of your interview. Our special guest speaker is Dr. Mary McDougall. Dr. McDougall is the Director of Operation ABLE of Michigan, a division of Spectrum Human Services. She has been the Operation ABLE Director for over 14 years. She has a PhD and an MA in counseling and a certificate of aging from Wayne State University. She is a licensed counselor. Mary has over 40 years of experience in the workforce field. Her specialty is career development for special groups, specifically those midlife career adults. So she is going to have some wonderful information for you. And Mary, welcome to the program.
To talk about interviewing, which is so important to people in terms of getting that next job. So we're going to be discussing your interview and taking advantage of it as an opportunity to maybe get a job and maybe get some additional information about the company. What actually is an interview? Well, it's just a business meeting, really, and it's an opportunity to explore good fit. And that is true from the employer's perspective, and it is true from the job seeker's perspective. Both actually go into the interview with the same goal, to see if this relationship is going to be good for the company and good for the individual. And in actuality, if it's going to be good for the company and the individual together, that's what makes the perfect match. Very often people feel like going to an interview is all on the hands of the employer, that they have all the control. But that isn't really true. The job seeker has control, especially if they can think like an employer. A job seeker needs to understand what is it that the employer is trying to find out during this interview about them. And so generally speaking, the things that employers want to know about is, what is this person's attitude? Attitude is a combination of all the soft skills that we hear so much about. Communication skills, ability to get along with other people, teamwork, flexibility, all those things that are so very important in the workplace. Of course, the employer is also trying to find out what is the skill level of the person that's applying for this job. Are they going to be able to do the job? So that means, what does their experience tell them about this person's qualifications? What does their education tell them? What can this candidate themselves say about their skills and talk about how they are a fit for this job? Then there's other aspects of fit. Is this person going to be comfortable in the setting of this company? Some companies are very corporate, they're very formal, structured. Other companies are very casual and laid back. The individual who is going to be a good employee in one might not be particularly a good fit for the other type of employer. So it's a matter of finding out whether this is a good fit. And it isn't even just with a company, it's with an individual department and with the specifics of the job. What employers tell us all the time is they are really looking to see how trainable is this employee, is this candidate. Basically, are they going to be able to do the continuous learning that is such an important part of today's workforce? And one of the things that can be an issue for those of us who are 50 and older is sometimes we're perceived as not wanting training, when in reality, most people 50 and older are really looking for the opportunities for more training. And so we have to be able to convey that to an employer during an interview. And then I'm coming back to attitude. It isn't a typo that it's on here twice. It's just that attitude is probably twice as important as anything else that the employer is trying to find out. They do not want to hire a problem, because if they hire a problem, it is going to be very difficult for them to change that person's attitude. They know they can get people to learn the skills that are required, but they're not so sure they can change people's attitudes. So they're going to be really looking at that. Then we need to look at, you're going into this interview to find out information too, because just because you're going for the interview doesn't mean, even if the job is offered to you, that you're going to want to take it. You have to find out some things about this job to let you know if this is a decision that is the right decision for you if you are given the opportunity to say yes to this job. So you want to find out about what are the responsibilities of the job. Is what they're going to expect you to do what you really want to do in a job? Very often, the job description that was posted and what the job is really like is quite dissimilar. So you really need to try to probe a little bit and find out what a typical day is going to be like for you in this job if you take this job. Of course, you're going to want to know about compensation, and we'll talk later about when that should be raised, when that issue should come up. But it is one of the things you're going to want to find out about. And compensation isn't just salary, it's benefits, it's scheduling, it's all kinds of different things that make a job the right job for you. And then, of course, you're going to want to find out if you're a good fit for the company. When you walk into this company, does it feel comfortable to you? Do you feel like, oh, yeah, I'd really kind of like to work here? Or do you feel sort of stifled when you walk into that company and that business? So you really want to know if every day that you're going to want to go to this job. Because when we have a job, especially if it's a full-time job, we really spend the best hours of our day there. We want to know that it is going to be something we're going to be comfortable with. There may be other things, especially during this time of pandemic, that you want to find out. For instance, you're maybe looking around saying, am I going to feel safe in this environment? Do I see people wearing masks? Do I see people socially distancing in this environment? Does it look clean in this environment? So there may be a lot of things you're wanting to find out. You may want to find out how hard is this place to get to and all those kinds of things too, some very practical issues. So there's a lot you want to find out about. And it isn't just listening, it is observing. Look around. Look how happy or unhappy people seem in the workplace. If you can get a tour of the work site, the department where you're going to be working, try to do that. That's always a really helpful piece of information for you. And then let's talk about what you need to do before you ever even go on the interview. Of course, you need to research the company. That used to be kind of an arduous task before the internet had so much information on it. Now you can do a lot of the research of the company just on the internet. Go to their website, go to their Facebook page, see what people are saying about them. If you know, Google the company and see what you find out when you Google them. If you know people that work there, call them up and talk to them. Ask them what they like about being a part of that company. Um, and then it isn't just enough to research the company, but research the job. This may be a job that you haven't had before, so you're going to want to be able to know a lot about what is expected in this job. So the more you know before you go in, the less likely you are to be hit with questions that you can't answer. And then before you go on the interview, gather what you need. Your resume, the resume that you're going to be using, the reference list, any credentials that you might need, and practice. We should know about practice, and listening to TV lately, we know what the candidates for president and vice president are doing. They are practicing. And what are debates? Debates are job interviewing. They are interviewing with each other, but they are also interviewing with the country for their job, and they are prepping for it. They are having people ask them the hard questions so that they're ready when they go for that debate. That's what you need to do to be ready for the job. Let's talk a little bit about what kinds of interviews you might be facing. One of the types of interviews that isn't as common now as it used to be is an informational interview. In days when things were a little more casual, you could call up a company and say, would you be willing? I'd like at some point maybe to work for your company. I'd like to find out what you might be looking for, and so forth. Now you can still do that, especially with small companies. It isn't always possible, but if you feel like the need for that, you should try to get an informational interview. For an informational interview, you are not necessarily talking about one specific job. You're talking more about general kinds of jobs that might be open at that company. Then there's the traditional interview. The traditional interview is where one job candidate is interviewed by one employer. A face-to-face, usually interview where there is an exchange between those two individuals. Then a team interview, which is probably the most common type of interview today, and that is where a candidate is interviewed by two people or three people or sometimes even more than that. But it is where you are really meeting with a number of people all at the same time to talk about whether you're a good candidate for the job. Usually there are people from a different perspective. It might be somebody from HR, the supervisor that you are going to have if you get the job, maybe a coworker, so that people who are looking at the candidate from different perspectives can learn about them. And you, on the other hand, can learn also a little bit about the viewpoint of the various people that you might be working with if you get the job. A group interview is where more than one candidate are interviewed by one or more people from the company at the same time. The thing you have to be careful about with a group interview is that you respect the other people that are also interviewing and that you not interrupt them. On the other hand, you want to make sure that you are assertive enough to get your points across as well. And then what is the newest type of interview is the virtual interview, and we're seeing a whole lot of that today. And that is where you are interviewed not in person, but on Zoom or Teams or Skype or one of those platforms. And so you need to then, if you're going to do that, not only practice interviewing, but you need to practice doing some interviewing on those platforms so that you're comfortable with using the various aspects of the virtual interview. One of the commonest questions when you think about interviewing is, what do I wear to an interview? Well, it's pretty much standard. It hasn't changed a lot. You wear business attire to an interview, unless you've been told to do something different. So for men, it's usually a suit and a tie, or it might be a shirt and a tie with a sport jacket. For women, it's a suit with a jacket or a tailored dress. Now, with virtual interviewing, of course, you only need to worry about what you're wearing from the waist up, so that makes it a little bit easier. But with regular interviews, be careful about things like shoes and purses and things like that, that they are clean and in good condition, that shoes are well heeled, that they're business shoes, and so forth. I think it's really important that you wear something that makes you feel good. If you feel good going into the interview, if you feel like you're looking the part, you're going to do a better job because it just helps you have more confidence, and that's important. We recommend a minimal jewelry. Hairstyle should be minimal, business hairstyle. And if it's a face-to-face interview, we recommend that you not wear any fragrances. It seems like more and more people are allergic to certain fragrances, or you never know when somebody might be reminded of someone they don't want to be reminded of by a fragrance. So, it's just better not to have any fragrances on during an interview. And then what do you bring? Well, you bring the resume, and if you are typical of most job candidates, you have several resumes. So you want to be sure that you bring the resume that is the one that they already have, and that you have in front of you to use that same resume so that you're singing from the same song sheet, so to speak. You want to bring a reference list, especially if this is a face-to-face interview. And your reference list should have on it the names of people that can talk about you in terms of your skills, in terms of your work ethic. And it should have on it how to contact that person. Usually phone and email are the best ways to contact people in today's world. You should have in your head, or maybe even written down, examples of skills and qualities that you have on your resume, because they're going to ask you about those things. And so you need to be able to talk comfortably about those. You also need to go with questions for the employer. The employer will almost always, especially at the end of an interview, ask you if you have questions. And you want to be able to act like you had thought about this interview and there's things you really want to know about the company and the job, and there really are. So get those down so that you're comfortable in asking any questions that the employer hasn't already answered. And then bring your ID, your licenses, if that's appropriate, and any other relevant credentials. Of course, for a virtual interview, you need to have those available, but you're not going to necessarily have to produce them during the interview itself. Here's some practical suggestions about interviews. If you are not totally familiar with the location of where the job interview is going to be, take a dry run, find out where you're going to park, find out if you have to take a van from the parking lot to the site. Because if there's anything you really want to do, it's be on time for an interview and not be rattled. So you want to know all the things that you're going to have to do in order to get to that site on time. You want to get a good night's sleep the day before. So that might mean not even thinking about the interview the night before, maybe watching a movie or doing something that's going to relax you so that you can get a good night's sleep. But be sure to set the alarm because, again, you cannot be late for an interview. We recommend that even people who don't normally eat breakfast, if this is a morning interview, eat a little something. You're going to use a lot of blood sugar in an interview. Your adrenaline is going to be going. You want to make sure that you are feeling strong and healthy and energetic for that interview. So eat a little something. Then it is showtime. And regardless of whether you want to be open and honest, and you always want to be open and honest at an interview, but you are wanting to bring your best self. This is, in a sense, like a performance. So you want to be optimistic, and that means being enthusiastic a bit too. Employers have been surveyed for years and years, and one of the top things they say they're looking for, regardless of the type of interview, is they want to see somebody who's enthusiastic in an interview and upbeat and positive. Many people are a little nervous in an interview, and in fact, you probably should be a little nervous in an interview because that is going to get your adrenaline going a little. You don't want to be over nervous, but you want to be able to be at your best. And a little extra adrenaline doesn't hurt. I think if you asked any actor or actress, they would say when they first go out on stage, they're a little nervous. That's what makes them have a peak performance, and that's what you want at this interview. And then remember that it is mostly about the connections you make with that employee employer and the connections you make with the job in the company. So keep that in mind. Now, the picture we have here shows you shaking hands, and you're probably not going to be doing that, but you can smile, and through your expression and through all of that, you're going to need to know, to show that employer that you are really connecting with them. And of course, through what you're saying. Okay, now it's question time. So let's discuss some of the problematic questions, or maybe they're not problematic, but they're ones that are predictable that you need to be prepared to answer. Whenever I talk to our clients at Operation Able about interviewing, and I talk about the question, tell me about yourself, there's usually at least somebody in the group that groans. They hate that question. Well, I'd like you to think differently about that question. I'd like you to see that when the employer asks you, tell me about yourself, they are giving you a wonderful opportunity. They are giving you an opportunity to give a little sales pitch about yourself. Not a long sales pitch, not everything about you, but 3 or 4 or 5 sentences that are the highlights of why you are going to be good for this job. So you need to think about, what can you tell the employer in that intro that is going to get them interested in hearing more about what you are talking about? So you might want to say something like, well, I'm a lifelong member of this community, and I have 6 years experience in job X, whatever it is that you're applying for. Some of the things that are my outstanding qualities are that I'm a team player, that I'm very customer oriented, and that I like to be productive on the job. Now, you're only going to say those things if those are true about you, but think about, what are your outstanding skills related to the job? What are your most important qualities related to this job? And that's what you want to give in this 3 or 4 sentence pitch to the employer. Then stop and pause. And if they say, tell me more, you can go on. But otherwise, they'll probably go on to another question. Most employers see, tell me about yourself, as kind of an opener, just to kind of get people started. They will almost always ask about your strengths. Your strengths should be related to this job. Your strengths should be skills and qualities about you that make you an asset to this company or to any company where you might work. That's usually a fairly easy question for people, but the harder question is, what are your weaknesses? That's the sand trap for most interviews. Most experienced interviewers ask that question. The reason being, employees tell them their real weaknesses. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't tell them a real weakness, but you do not want to give them a weakness that is going to get in your way of getting this job. On the other hand, you don't want to act like you're avoiding it. I've had people say, well, my weakness is I like chocolate. Well, the employer knows you're just avoiding the question when you say something like that. So you need to come up with some real weaknesses, but they don't need to be ones that are going to be a surprise to the employer or that are going to be putting a shadow of doubt on your candidacy. So some of the things you might want to talk about in that are related to something that you've already discussed in earlier parts of the interview. Like maybe they said to you, do you know Salesforce? And that which is a software. And you may say, well, no, I really don't know Salesforce. And they say, because you're going to have to learn that on the job. So when they ask what are your weaknesses category, you could say, well, as we've already discussed, I don't know Salesforce, but I've worked with a lot of other databases, and I'm sure that I can learn it quickly. I've heard a lot about Salesforce, and I'm really anxious to learn it. That would be one way to address your weakness. Another thing is to talk about something that had been a weakness is no longer. For example, if you are applying for a job where you're going to be using Microsoft Office, you might say, well, if you would ask me that question 6 months ago, I would have had to say that I don't know the latest Microsoft Office. But I've taken advantage during the pandemic of taking some online courses. I've just completed an Excel and a Microsoft Intermediate Word course, and now I feel really comfortable with the latest version of Microsoft. Or you might talk about, if this is a management job, you might say, well, when I was first a manager, I had a hard time delegating. But in my more recent jobs, I've learned that I can be so much more effective if I delegate well. So now I think I'm a pretty good person at delegating, and I would bring that skill to this management job with me. So you're talking about a former weakness, not a current weakness. And then a real easy one to use if you've never worked for the company is to say, well, I guess a weakness for me would be that I've never worked for your company, but I'm really anxious to find out how you do things here. And I know that I'll have a lot to learn, but I'm really excited about this opportunity. They already know you don't know their company. They're just glad to know that you have to learn how to do things their way. And the last question I have on this predictable question list is, why do you want to work here? You need to have thought about that. You need to have known, what is the reputation of this company? Why do you want this to work here? Maybe it's about the job. Maybe it's about the company itself. Maybe it's about their reputation in the community or personal experience you've had with the company that was positive. So have an answer to that question. Then there is a whole category of questions called behavioral interviewing questions. These are questions like, tell me about a time when you were on a team that didn't meet its goal. Well, what you want to do in that kind of a question is talk about the fact that you take accountability and that you learn from things. So in that question, you might give them an example of a time a team project didn't work well and say, but one of the things we did when the project was not going well, we sat down, we talked about all the things that were going on. We came up with a game plan that helped somewhat resolve that project. But the next project we went into, we were so much better and more effective as a team. They might ask you about, tell me about a time when you disagreed with the supervisor. What you want to make sure you do is not blame the supervisor. Never in these questions blame other people. Talk about what you learned from the situation. And sometimes behavioral questions can be positive. They can say, tell me about a time when you introduced a new idea to your company. So you might need to be able to talk about something like that. So behavioral interview questions are the current trend. You will be asked them almost always in interviews today. Then there's the salary and benefit questions. And the main one there is, when do you ask them? I'm a firm believer that you should not introduce the question of salary and benefit until the employer does. Because then when the employer talks about it, then you have an opportunity to ask about it. They know you want to know about salary and benefits. But let's say, for instance, that this is an interview that isn't going to end with a job offer today, because there's going to be a second interview or a third interview. They may not want to raise the issue of salary for some reason at this point with you. So you don't want to raise it either. Wait till they raise the issue of salary and benefit. But when they do, if they ask you something like, well, what are you looking for in the salary? You, of course, don't want to price yourself out of the market, and you don't want to get a job, go in lower than you could possibly get. So you need to have looked a little bit on the website to find out about what salary ranges for that job are, and ONET online is a good source for that. But the other thing that you need to do is you need to throw that question back. You need to say, well, I'm not sure of your salary range. Could you give me an idea of your salary range? Or you could say, well, it depends a little bit on benefits. Could you give me a little bit of an idea of what your benefit package would be? And that is a very true statement, because you could accept a lower salary if they have a wonderful benefit package. But if they have no benefits, you might need a little more money in your salary. So those questions are always there to give you a little bit of an idea of how to answer that. 3 things to feature during your interview are how you're going to be of value to the company, accomplishments in your past jobs, and your attitude. And two things to avoid, and maybe the most important thing that you could get from today's talk, is never say anything negative about a previous employer, a previous coworker, or a previous customer. Even if the employer seems to be wanting to get you to do that, they are trying to get you to do that to see whether they can, are you a negative person or not. So don't fall into that trap. Never say anything negative about a previous employer. The other thing is, it is not a good idea to talk more than you listen. If you listen to the interviewer, you're going to find out what's important to them. And then when they ask you a closing question about why should we hire you, you're going to be able to respond to some of the things you heard them saying were important to them. So being a good listener is essential. Just some closing issues. A final wrap up with the interview is leave them with a positive statement. Thank them for the opportunity to meet with them. Tell them that you look forward to the next steps. Get a business card or contact information. And if they haven't made it clear, clarify what the next steps are. So if it's going to be a month before you know, let them know that. Find out that, so that you're not thinking, if you didn't hear back from them in 3 days, that you didn't get the job when they're really not even planning to make a decision for a few weeks. After the interview, always send a thank you note. You can do it by email in these days. You can do it by mail, but you do need to follow up with them. Thank them and re-verify that you're still interested in the job. If they ask you to do some next steps, they want you to send them something, they want you to go online and do something, be sure you do that and you do it timely. And then think about what you learned during that interview and use that to make a decision. If they make you an offer, you may or may not want to take the job, but you have to mull it over and give it some thought so that you'll be ready to know what to say if they do make you an offer. And at the same time, think about, what did you do really well in that interview that you want to do next time? And what might you want to beef up a little bit so that you're better at it the next time? And I've listed here the information to call us. You're more than welcome to call Operation Able if you would like some help with practicing interviewing or any other aspects of your job search. Our phone number and my email is there.
Thank you, Dr. McDougall. Those were some wonderful tips, just great information. We have a few questions and comments. So what I heard here was that an interview is a two-way street.
That's right.
So the interviewee is also interviewing and collecting information about whether or not that employer is a good choice for them. Is that correct?
That's very correct.
Great, great. I don't think a lot of people interpret it that way, but it was good to hear that.
Yes, and that's why you really need to have some questions that you want to be sure are answered during the interview. And if the interviewer at the end, let's say they've answered all your questions and they say, "Do you have questions for me?" Then a good thing to say is, "Well, I came in with a lot of questions, but you've answered them all. So thank you. I really appreciate all the information you've given me." Kind of gives them some positive feedback, and it lets them know that you did have questions.
Okay. Do you recommend that a person practice in advance of their interview, maybe with using their phone to record or doing a back and forth with a family member?
Oh, definitely. I would try to get a family member, maybe somebody who's done some interviewing or a friend that's done some interviewing, so that they can really practice the hard questions. And they should let that interviewer know what are the questions that they're afraid are going to be asked, because it doesn't do any good to just hope that an employer doesn't ask a question. You have to know, if they ask a difficult question, how you're going to answer it. Like maybe why there's a gap in your background, or were you ever fired, or something like that. You have to have an answer that you're comfortable with on that.
Well, that segues into a particular question. How much should a person tell about work experience that is not on the resume?
Well, if it's not on the resume, I would assume that it might not be relevant, specifically relevant to this job, but might be something from a past career. So what you could do when if they're saying what else have you done, you can say, well, before I went into my more recent job of call center operator, I worked in healthcare. And from that, I learned a lot about working with people who are under pressure. I learned a lot about time management. I learned a lot about empathy. And I would bring that to any job that I came with. So, you can bring some of those things because every job has transferable skills that you can bring to the next job.
That's true. That's true. Especially for someone who is mid-career.
Yes.
They've had skills and experiences that are broad.
Right. And the other thing that the mid-career people have that younger people don't have is they have a lot of experience in knowing what's expected on the job. They know they have the work ethic, dependability, teamwork, all the learning that goes into a job. So that's important, and employers really want that today.
Okay. You noted about wearing a fragrance. Does that apply to men too? Not
Yes.
wearing a fragrance?
Yes, it does.
Yes. Okay. That's great. And it makes sense because people are allergic and you don't know who's allergic to what.
Right.
The next question is, in this day of online applications and communications, primarily through a human resource department, how does one send a thank you note? Who do you send it to?
Well, that's part of getting some contact information before you leave. If it's a live interview, you could get a business card if they have business cards. A lot of HR people today don't use business cards. They just don't seem to want to give out that information. But you could ask for an email address. Or if push comes to shove, you can always send it by snail mail. That still works. And so, but if you can get an email address, I would certainly try to get one.
Okay.
And very often they've set up your interview via email. So you may have an email address from that contact as well.
You noted to eat something in order to feel strong and healthy for an interview. How important is it for a person to look healthy to an employer?
Well, I think it's really important because, especially for those of us that are not 25, the employer is going to worry a little bit about our health. And so, you want to look healthy. You want to not talk about health problems unless there's some special reason why you have to. And so, the employer is going to say, well, this is a job that requires a lot of stamina. Is this something that you can do? And you aren't going to say something like, well, I have a lot more stamina now that it's been a couple of years since my stroke. You're gonna, you've got to be careful about what you say. You want to say, yes, I put in a full day's work at home every day. I'm looking forward to this job. I know I have the stamina and the strength to do it. So answer the question without giving too much other information.
That's a good point. That's a very good point because I know people struggle with that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, do you have any final closing comments?
Well, no, the only thing that I have to say is try to enjoy the interview process because every interview you go on, you're going to learn something. I always think it's better not to have your first interview in a long time be your dream job. If you go on an interview, you're going to learn about some of the questions that you want to get polished a little bit better. And so every interview is a good opportunity. And even if you don't get a job, what might happen is you might make a really good connection with that employer that is going to then be useful later. They may remember you and call you when another opportunity comes up. Or if you see a future job posting, you may be able to apply again and you already have a relationship with them.
Well, thank you, Dr. McDougall. We're going to put back up your contact information slide again as we go out. We really appreciate this series that you have brought to us, interview techniques, resume writing, and making choices about going back to work after age 50. It has been a wonderful three-part series. The
Thank
series,
you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
great. The series is posted on Facebook. It will continue to be there. So for any of you who have missed any of the series, it is there. Again, it was going back to work after 50, interview techniques today, and resume writing was last week. So they're there. Get the information and run with it. Thank you, Dr. McDougall.